So over the weekend, we discovered that at least 2 or 3 drones, I'm told, were flown. Now, where were they flown from? We're assuming Finnish soil because the target was about 200 kilometers east of Finland, up near the Arctic Circle on the Kola Peninsula, where the
Now a
Russians
member of
have.
NATO.
Yeah, and Kola Peninsula is important because the Russians have strategic bombers located on the Kola Peninsula. And you go a little further, and they have their submarines, their strategic submarine arsenal. It's a very highly militarized area. All of a sudden, these drones appear out of nowhere, but we think they were flown from Finland. They managed to destroy a supersonic Tupolev bomber on the ground. Now, this is something that under normal circumstances, the Ukrainians, with what they've got, could never reach. You're talking about trying to fly something like that from Ukraine all the way up to the Arctic Circle, it would never make it. So we think it probably came from Finland. This now means that we have done something that the Russians have told us is a red line. We have actually permitted attacks to be launched from NATO soil, ostensibly by the Ukrainians. Now, how the Ukrainians got to Finland is incomprehensible to me. But again, that sort of thing is not going to happen without Washington knowing about it, certainly not without the CIA and MI6 in London knowing about it. And if you were president of the United States, Clayton, and somebody came to you and said, "This is our plan. This is what we want to do," and you had any presence of mind, you would say, "Well, that's outrageous. That means we're at war with Russia. I don't want to do that." And Biden has said that repeatedly. Yet this is exactly what we've done.
What do you think the response from Russia's side will be? Now, this is something Putin has said. This would be World War III. This is something that Dmitry Medvedev has said. This would be World War III. An attack from NATO soil would be a bridge too far. That would be a red line. Now, it seems like we've been bumping up against these red lines now for the past year or more.
I think President Putin knows that we are roughly 95, 96 days from the anticipated election in November. I think his preference would be to absorb the damage and wait to see whether or not there is a new administration in November that is likely to change policy. I think that's his preference. Putin is not an impulsive man. He's also not a dangerous, unbalanced maniac by any stretch of the imagination. This is a man who's bent over backwards to avoid war with the United States and NATO. He's taken a lot of abuse from us. He's put up with a lot of infractions, a lot of crossing of his red lines, but he wants desperately to avoid that war. We, on the other hand, have continually escalated and escalated and escalated. And this is now a very serious escalation. We're not talking about drones flown from within Ukraine by, say, British intelligence or American intelligence officers designed to strike targets in Crimea. That's different. You're flying from within the Ukrainian airspace and soil. This is now from a NATO country, ostensibly Finland. I don't think the Finns may be completely aware, and this is another problem. I think the Finns and the Swedes are now beginning to wake up slowly to the reality that they are now platforms for the projection of American military power against Russia. I don't think they necessarily signed up for that. What they were signing up for was protection from Russian attack. What they become, though, is this unsinkable aircraft carrier for U.S. forces against Russia. That's very dangerous because there is always the possibility that the Moscow decides, well, we're not going to attack all of NATO on this particular occasion because they can target everything along this 1,000-mile front, if you will. We'll just limit it to where we think this was flown from inside Finland. And I'm sure by now the Russians know where it came from or where the drones came from. They know what was used against them. I mean, this sort of thing you can't conceal once it's been done. And they could easily say, well, we're going to do this. Now, the reason for not doing it is, as I said before, Putin would prefer to wait for the outcome of the election and see whether or not it makes any difference. But he has every right to respond. The question is, what do we do? Are we going to be dumb enough to respond to that with more acts of war against Russia? Or Are we going to step back and say, well, we pushed too far because a war with Russia is not what we want? I don't know, but when's the last time anybody discussed this with the American electorate?
I haven't heard any discussion of this from Kamala Harris. I haven't heard any discussion of this from President Biden. And I haven't heard anything from the White House podium on this. And so I think if we ask the American people, we can ask the American people right now, do you want a hot war with Russia? Do the Finnish people want a hot war with Russia? I'll ask our Finnish viewers who watch us on a regular basis. Let us know if you're up there near the Arctic Circle. Do you want to be wiped off the map because of Washington, D.C. and the NATO brass? Colonel, it's
before we leave this, I just want to make one quick note that we also have information that a series of ambushes were conducted against Russians in Central Africa. These are Wagner people, in other words, Russian mercenaries that came in and replaced us in countries where formerly we were operating, quote unquote, against Islamists. All of a sudden, with great success, far beyond the normal capabilities of the Islamists, there were attacks killing 50, 60 Russians in an ambush on the ground in Central Africa. Now, we've also discovered that they were being advised and assisted by Ukrainian forces. In other words, advisors from the Ukrainian military. This is another example of how far this war has gone and how dangerous it has become, because now the Ukrainians went to Central Africa, assisted the people that we previously were attacking because of their Islamist agenda, and they are now helping these Islamists kill Russians in an area of no strategic importance to Ukraine whatsoever. Again, could this happen without us knowing it? I rather doubt it. I once again, I think these Ukrainians are operating as surrogates for us. So if the Ukrainians can do that in Central Africa, in a place like Chad or Niger or any of these countries where we were formerly operating, could they not also go to Finland and launch drone strikes against the Russians at a strategic air base and destroy a bomber? And I guess the answer is yes. All of this is very disturbing because it looks like an out of control operation. It's very similar to Stanley Kubrick's movie. It doesn't make any sense. Everything's out of control. Who the hell is in charge? I don't think Biden's in charge of anything. I'm not sure Kamala necessarily knows very much. Kamala Harris. Again, who's behind these people? And I hesitate to point to specific people and give you their names and say they're doing something because I don't know. I don't know what's going on in the White House. And now we know the Hill is certifiable. I mean, they're ready to underwrite a war against Iran on behalf of Israel. Again, is that something we Americans want to do? When's the last time that was debated openly and in public? Well, it's very hard to do that when the media is entirely on the side of the government in terms of its interest in waging global war everywhere we can. It's insane, and it's dangerous, and it's out of control.
It is Dr. Strangelove. You're absolutely right about that. Yeah. And who is running the shop right now? Congress is on vacation. President Biden is, by all accounts, brain dead. It's weekend at Bernie's. And is it President Obama? President Obama, who set up shop and bought a house in Washington, D.C., the only president in 100 years to buy a house in Washington, D.C. When you leave Washington, you get out of Washington, D.C. So maybe it's President Obama running the show there. Unbelievable. And I think everything is changing in 24 hours spades right now. And I think I would be really surprised if President Biden remains president by November 5th of this year, but we'll see. Colonel Douglas MacGregor, always a voice of reason in a sea of madness right now. Thank you so much for joining us as always, Colonel. Great to see you.
Sure. Thank you. Appreciate it, Clayton.